beautiful. Thank you. I'm so glad.
Thank you for introducing us to that.
My pleasure.
Thank you for last night. It was so great.
Oh, that was joyful. The service was beautiful. The rabbis and the rabbis Glickman and Rabbi Sheffrin and the musician Cynthia, just beautiful service.
How far are you from LA?
Well, we're a suburb of LA, so we're part of LA City, part of LA County. But if you know LA, we're a half an hour's drive from West LA, which is the sort of center of the world, and about 40 minutes drive from downtown where nobody goes.
You're in the valley.
But never like that.
In the valley.
In the valley.
Valley. I mean, the crazy thing about LA is you can drive for 2 hours and still be in LA. That's the problem. Of course, you could drive for 2 hours and get 3 miles. That's the other problem with LA.
That's true.
Rabbi, I'm glad you've got your coffee, being that it's quite early.
But we're fine. We're good. This is Shabbos morning. I get up early, so it's nice. And
It's 11 o'clock.
8 o'clock out there.
Yeah, it's 8 o'clock in the morning here, so it's very quiet.
It's a nice time of day.
Yeah, it's actually very nice out. It's very nice, yeah.
Better.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Hi, Paul.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, I know.
Rabbi Sheffrin, my family says hello. We had Shabbos last night on Zoom, and they all send their love.
Aw, thank you so much. That's so nice. I adore your family.
Nessa's in Phoenix. She's doing an internship, finishing her doctorate.
Good for her.
They're about to offer her a big job, so she's very excited. And
she's a spectacular young woman.
Her husband's doing his master's degree in electrical engineering at ASU.
I can't hear anything.
Are you muted?
We hear you, Ruth. I'll send Ruth the chat.
Ruth? Is there another Ruth?
No, different Ruth.
Oh, we have another one?
Ruth, we can chat you as well if you'd like. We don't want you to feel left out.
Oh, thank you.
You belong here.
Thank you. So was your sermon last night recorded in any way that we can fulfill our mitzvah, our mission, and send it to our grandkids?
Yes.
I called my grandkids this morning to tell them to tune in to what Chutzpah is about.
And I'll also give a plug to one of my favorite books. Rabbi Feinstein has a collection of stories that he's compiled, and that story is in it, and it is a phenomenal book. Is it Capturing the Moon? Is that the correct title, Rabbi? You're muted.
Muted.
Capturing the Moon is the storybook. Yeah, 36 Jewish stories. Makes a lovely bar mitzvah gift.
Along with a pen.
Good to know.
Along with a pen.
Good morning, Rabbi Michael, and good morning, Rabbi Feinstein. I grew up at your temple.
Yes, Lynn, Lori Dorman told him the whole story on Thursday night.
How could she? She wasn't even born yet. I started going there when I was a little kid with my father. And the rabbi married us, but he's long gone by now.
Actually, he had his 6th yard site. Rabbi Showeiss married you, or who married you?
No.
Rabbi Bergman?
Bergman.
Oh, he was my teacher. And he was my neighbor, and he lived 2 doors down, and he was my teacher. And very sweet, very, very beautiful man. Wonderful, wonderful scholar.
He also bar mitzvahed both of my brothers.
Oh, wonderful. They still Jewish?
Well, my one brother is deceased.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He died in 2019, and
I'm very sorry.
thank you. Cancer.
Oh.
Yeah.
Friends, we're going to wait just 1 or 2 more minutes because we're getting just still a flood of people are pouring in right now. So we're going to give them another, maybe one more minute.
Wow. A lot of people, 64.
Hi,
Hi, Marlise.
Marlise. Hi,
Hi,
Lynn.
Marlise.
Hi, Rivka.
Hi, Lynn. How are you?
I'm fine.
Oh, there you are in the upper left.
Yeah,
And you're in the lower left.
yeah. And we're playing at Betty's on Wednesday night.
Yes.
I'm coming to you, Lynn.
Yes.
We'll go together.
Yep.
Oh,
Let's all go to Betty's on Wednesday night.
Play Mahjong?
She will be.
I know your wife plays Mahjong.
Rabbi, I think that goes against temple COVID policy.
You can also play Mahjong online now, which is what I do.
Yeah, no, we don't do
I
that.
don't care for that.
Well, all four of us are here, so we can actually play from where we are today.
Yeah.
Priya, are the babies with you? Yay. Good morning, Priya. Shabbat Shalom. We want to say hi to Eitan and Kohav.
Oh, yes. I would like to see them. They are so cute.
Rabbi. Say hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Rabbi.
Hi, Ellen.
Good morning, Ellen. Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi, when the Temple Times came, the last one, your face is on it. So she brought it to me and she said, look, Mama, it's Rabbi.
We want to say hi to Eitan and Kohav.
Cute. Oh, yes. I would like to see them. They are so cute.
Hi.
Dear Tov, dear
Say
one.
hi, Rabbi.
All right, who's watching the live stream?
Hi, Ellen.
Good morning, Ellen.
Hi, Ethel.
Rabbi, when the Temple Times came, the last one, your face is on it. So she brought it to me and she
Who's
said,
watching
look,
the
Mama, it's Rabbi.
live stream?
Cute. Oh, yes.
Hi, Lori.
And they're so cute.
All right, someone's is on live stream and also Zoom. So we're getting a feedback loop, but you know what, we're gonna go ahead and mute everyone. So everyone, it is time to go ahead and begin. People are still coming in, but that's fine. They can be late. Friends, welcome to our annual Kaplan Scholar and Residence Program. It has already been wonderful. On Thursday night, our scholar absolutely wowed and endeared himself to the members of our Cornerstone Society. And then Friday night with a story and inspiration as part
Can I
be
of
heard?
our Shabbat celebration. And now we come to our culmination with our featured presentation. Before we begin, I just want to offer some words of thanks to everyone who made this day, this weekend, this Shabbat possible for us. Of course, we begin with our sponsors, Arnie and Dee Kaplan. I haven't seen them yet. Oh yeah, Arnie's on. So I just haven't seen him, but I see he's on the list. Dee and Arnie, thank you so much for sponsoring this each year and bringing such delight to our whole congregation. We had an enormous turnout, surge of attendance in our services last night. And of course, today, again, another big crowd. Thank you for bringing us together in scholarship. We also want to thank Charles Peck and family, who also co-sponsor and subsidize this program and have for many, many years, and we thank you. Want to offer special thanks to the chairs of our Kaplan Scholar and Residence Committee. That is Larry and Wendy Barnett. Larry and Wendy, you do everything with such delight. Not only lead the discussion of scouring our whole nation for the best in scholarship and really just entertaining and enthusiastic presenters, not just great scholars. But then what they did is represent us very well. So there they are up on the screen. So normally we try to extend hospitality to all of our scholars in residence, and we provide them with lovely weather. We provide them with hospitality and warm greetings and welcome baskets and things like that. And Larry and Wendy decided that this year should be no different. And so they've sent 2 different packages with gifts to Rabbi Feinstein in California, so that he would feel some of our temple hospitality even while he's at home. Larry, Wendy, for all that you do and how you represent our temple and everything that you've done for us, we thank you and invite everyone to please offer your applause. And we want to thank other members of the committee. Oh, Larry, do you want to do that, Wendy, or do you want me to?
No, you can. If you, that would be great, but you're not going to give yourself and Rabbi Shefrin enough credit. So we just want to be sure that as you thank the committee members, which have been wonderful, that you might mention yourself and Rabbi Shefrin, because Rabbi Shefrin's special relationship at Mimi's, Rabbi Mimi's, with this, with the Feinstein family, really was awfully important. And Rabbi Feinstein, this is most unusual that we would be able to have him with us. This is so great. But you'll mention the committee, please.
Yes, so I'm drawing from memory now. I'm thinking Philip Meltzer, Toby Halpern, Esther Rose. Did I get everybody who was at our meeting?
Wendy Wicks.
Wendy Wicks.
Arnie Kaplan, because Arnie is very much a part of it.
And so thank you all. And now I think it's time that we jump right in, unless we have other announcements. Havdalah this evening is at 5 o'clock in person, 8:30 on the live stream. And we have wonderful events coming up this week ahead, culminating in some special celebrations of Debbie Friedman on Thursday night and at Shabbat services this Friday. But now, my friends, we gave more lengthy introductions at the previous week, but you're here because you already understand and you know who our speaker is. And I don't want to take any time away from his presentation with a lengthy introduction, but to say this is just one of those little silver lines. With all of the bad, sometimes comes a little good. And this is one, that little bit of good that the pandemic has brought us. I don't think we would ever have had the opportunity to learn so personally with Rabbi Feinstein, to pull him away from his very important and active congregation, other than the fact that he didn't have to travel. And it's, it's 4 a.m. in California. It's not 4 a.m, but it's still very early in the morning in California, which means we're not taking away from his congregation, which meant this is possible and that he was willing to accept. We kind of took a long shot and a floater to see if he'd be interested. And when he said yes, we were so happily surprised. And this is just an unexpected treat and grace that all of us get to enjoy and appreciate. Rabbi Shefrin, we want to thank you, is going to be our behind the scenes director of today's program, whether it's text and he's broadcasting it on the live stream. But everyone here on Zoom, we will have a chance to, to offer questions. We recommend that the first questions that we're going to be offering after his presentation will be from the chats. So if you have questions that come up, we encourage you to use the chat feature. But for now, without any further ado, we introduce to you the 2021 Kaplan Scholar in Residence from California, Rabbi Ed Feinstein.
Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom. It's a pleasure to join you this morning. It's actually kind of an interesting experience. I live in California, but this little corner of my living room is now Sarasota, Florida. So it's really a joy. Let me begin by just expressing a little bit of gratitude. I'm really delighted to be with you. And I'm very grateful to Rabbi Michael Shefrin for reaching out and making this possible, and wish him all of my blessings. And it's been wonderful coming close and getting to know the rabbis Glickman and sharing their warmth and their love and their joy with together. That's been a wonderful experience. a very deep thank you to all of those who made this possible, to the Kaplan and Peck families for the support of this weekend, to the Barnetts for their amazing, wonderful hospitality. We got this big box from Amazon the other day, walked it into the house, opened it up, wondered who was sending me stuff, and found this wonderful box of goodies inside that my wife and I are really enjoying. So thank you so much for your kindness and for the times that we've had a chance to spend together. It's been really a joy, and I hope that this learning elevates you and gives you a little bit of strength to get through this next time in our lives. So thank you so very, very much. We're going to learn together, and I'll stop a few times to answer some questions. I've been accused of having the pedagogic style of Benito Mussolini. So if you have a question you want to ask, you sort of have to like put it in the chat or wave your hands around or throw a shoe at your computer or television. And I promise you, more or less, I'll stop sometime and we'll get some questions answered. Okay? So let me wish you once again Shabbat Shalom and thank you for joining. Like most kids of my generation, I went to Hebrew school. Well, rather, I was taken to Hebrew school. But I was this very strange kid. I loved Hebrew school. Not for the reason you think, not because I had some, early rabbinic leanings. I had a much more practical reason for loving Hebrew school. I have 3 brothers, and Hebrew school was the best place in the world to meet females. And so what I would do is get to Hebrew school, and whoever they sat me next to, I would chat up. I would find something to talk about. I would get to know them. I would, talk. And we had these teachers. All of our Hebrew school teachers were former commandos from the Israeli army. And she would look down at me chatting at my seatmate, and she would say to me, Yitzchak, Sheket. Translation, Yitzchak is my Hebrew name, and Sheket is roughly shut up, be quiet. And I'd say, Kain Mora, that much Hebrew I knew. Yes, teacher. And then I would go on chatting because that was a hell of a lot more important than anything going on in the class. And she would look at me again and say, Yitzchak, Sheket, be quiet. And I would say, Kain Mora, Kain. And then I'd go on chatting. And finally, the third time, my third Yitzchak Sheket, she would say, La Sifriya, go to the library. And I got banished to the library every afternoon. Now, the synagogue library where I grew up, there was a pretty good synagogue library. And as a kid who liked to read, it was a joy. I'd go to the synagogue library, I'd sit myself down, and over the course of some years of Hebrew school, I managed to read through a good deal of that library. I would sit there from 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock reading, and at 6 o'clock, the old guys for the minyan would come in, and they'd see this poor forlorn kid sitting in the library, and they'd say, Sonny boy, come with us. And I'd go to the minyan, and they're the guys that taught me how to daven, and they also taught me how to drink schnapps and smoke cigars and tell jokes with punchlines I can't repeat in mixed company. Hey, Sonny boy, you know this one? And that was my Jewish education. Until sometime in I think it was 3rd or 4th grade. I don't remember exactly. I got the same treatment. I came to Hebrew school and the teacher says, Yitzchak Sheket. I got my first Yitzchak Sheket. That came usually about 10 minutes into the class. And my second Yitzchak Sheket, that came 10 more minutes into the class. And then I got my La Sifriya, and I picked up my books and I'm walking to the door when I hear the word that sends chills through the spine of any Hebrew school student. Rega. Hang on a minute, she says. I turn around. Kain Mora? Yes, teacher? She says, you're going to be in the library. Do something for me. Okay, sure, of course. What would you like me to do? Write a book report. Okay, I can write a book report. I know how to do that. I do that in school. I know how to write a book report. Any particular book, or can I just choose one? And now she gets this conspiratorial smile on her face and she says, yeah, the Bible. Write a book report about the Bible. I said, you can't write a book report about the Bible. She says, it's a book, right? Well, yeah, good. Then write a book report about the Bible. Have it done by 6:30 or you don't go home. Okay. So I got a big piece of that, remember 3rd grade paper with the thick lines and a number 3 pencil. So I sit down and I write my name at the top, name, Yitzchak Sheket. That's my name, right? And then you remember how a book report goes? Name of the book. Well, I cheated a little bit. I took a copy of the Torah. The Torah. Author. Unknown. publisher of the book, Jewish Publication Society, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then all the questions of a book report. Main character, setting of the book, somewhere in the Middle East, plot of the book, and then conflict in the plot, resolution of the conflict, and the all-important question, would you recommend this book to your friends? Now, that book report, I don't know if I ever really finished it, but it occurs to me that I've been spending the rest of my adult life trying to fill out that book report, trying to write that book report. We don't ask that question of the Bible. When we read Torah, we read a Torah portion of the week. We read a couple of psukim, a couple of verses, and we read a chapter. We read an episode. We talk about a character. We don't ask ourselves, what's the whole narrative arc, the whole story of the Torah? For that matter, we don't ask that question about Judaism. We talk about a particular ritual. We're going to have Tu B'Shvat in a couple of weeks. So we'll talk about the birthday of the trees, or Purim, or Pesach. We'll talk about a particular idea of slavery and freedom. We'll talk about a particular a custom or a period of history. But we never ask the question, what is the message of Judaism? What is the message of the Jewish tradition? What is the narrative arc of the Jewish tradition? We are much more comfortable asking questions of how do you do something Jewish, than we are asking questions of why do you do something? Why do you do a certain kind of a ritual of why is Judaism say this? I mean, think for a moment about the Passover Seder. There are four children who sit at the Pesach table, right? The one who asks the question, what are the laws and traditions? How do you do this? He's honored as the Chacham, the wise kid. The kid who says, why are we doing this? What does this mean to you? That kid is castigated as the Rasha, as the wicked kid, which is really unfortunate, because that's the question really that needs to be answered that night. I mean, we're after Seder already, so you don't need to know all the laws and traditions. What you need to know is, what does this mean to us? How does the narrative of the Exodus and of slavery and freedom find a place in our own lives in this moment of our history? It's the wicked kid's question that the whole Seder is set up to address. And then there's the fourth one. The fourth one's the one I never understood. She'eno yodea lishol, a kid who doesn't know how to ask a question? What kind of Jew doesn't know how to ask a question? At least you ask, when do we eat? That's a question. But it turns out I understand him now. She'eno yodea lishol, the kid who doesn't ask the question at the Seder table, isn't dumb or mute. He's yesterday's Rasha. He's the kid who asked the question yesterday. He asked the question, why are we doing this? What's the meaning of this story? What does this story mean to us? And we said to him, you're a wicked kid, sit there and be quiet. So you know what he does? He sits at the end of the table and he's quiet. He wants nothing to do from us. He doesn't want anything to do with the story that we tell. He doesn't see himself in the story that we tell. And wouldn't you know it? There's a whole generation of those kids now, She'eno yodea lishol. In the last Pew study of American Jewish life, it found that when asked the question, what is your current religion? Something like 25% of American Jews and 35% of young Jews checked the box labeled none. Not Orthodox, not conservative, not Reform, not Reconstructionist, not Renewal, not Zionist, not anti-Zionist, not religious, not anti-religious, not a believer, not an atheist, just a none. I want nothing to do with this. Because they asked us the question, that question, what does this mean to you? What is the message of this tradition? What does this tradition say to us? And we didn't have an answer. We said, that's a question you can't ask. That's a question we're not prepared to address. So I think it's terribly important at this moment in our history that we know how to answer that question, so that when your children and your grandchildren come to you and say, why are you Jewish? Why are you Jewish? You have an answer for them. At least you have an answer you've thought about. And I'm going to urge you to think about it. I'm going to give you an answer today that you might want to use. But if not my answer, think about your answer. And what you're going to find is, to my chagrin, of course, all of our, that the answers that were good for us when we were young, a sense, for example, of ethnic loyalty, doesn't really work for them. They don't feel ethnic connections anymore. Yiddish jokes don't move them anymore. They want to know, what is the moral imperative of this tradition? How does this tradition touch the world and touch me and give me a sense of who I am and what I am in the world? That's what they're looking for. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for a sense of how the universe is put together and where I can find my place in that universe. That's what they're most looking for. So how should we answer the question? What is the narrative arc of the Jewish tradition? How should we tell the story of our biblical book report? Well, the main character of the Torah, when we open the Torah, is a character named God. And what's really interesting about the main character of the Torah is we know nothing about God. It doesn't tell us anything about God's backstory, about God's private life, about where this God came from. We don't even know what this God is, what he's made of. We only know two things about this God from opening the book of Genesis, from opening the first chapters of the Torah. Number one, this God creates. That's what God's doing at the very beginning. God's creating. That's the very first line of the Torah. And then number two, when God creates stuff, he blesses it. Vayar Elohim ki tov, it's good. He likes what he creates. He appreciates it. Now, why does he appreciate it? Because he has a plan in mind. And you can see that plan in the very first chapter of Genesis. In the very first chapter of Genesis, the plan is evident that everything in Genesis rolls out in an order, that everything makes way for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until the world is complete. And you can tell that, by the way, if you read Genesis, the first chapter of Genesis, if you read it backwards. In order, the last thing created are human beings and animals. But in order to have human beings and animals, you need smaller animals. And in order to have smaller animals, you need vegetation. And in order to have vegetation, you need land and water and sunlight. And in order to have land and water and sunlight, you need, and that's how the whole thing comes together. It's an ordered creation. God's dream is to create an ordered world, or to put it in religious language, a world of oneness. Everything in Genesis is one. God and his creation is one. You can tell that because look how he creates stuff. He doesn't make anything. He doesn't form anything. He just breathes reality into the world. The first thing he creates is light, and the language, let there be light. But the Hebrew is much more graphic because it's two words and there's no consonants until the very last letter, yehi or. Light, just be light, let light be. And it's just breathing reality. There's a oneness between God and God's creation. There's a oneness among all the elements of creation. Everything depends upon everything else, and everything supports everything else. There's a oneness when he creates human beings, a oneness among human beings. Man and woman are created together in chapter 1, and in chapter 2, woman is created from the side of man. And then there's a oneness between God and man. Human beings are in the image of God. We're the only thing in all of creation that reflects God. And in the second chapter, God breathes into us. God breathes our life into us. There's all this oneness. And at the end of the chapter, what does God do? God puts us into a garden. That's our first home, we human beings. We live in a garden. Now, think about a garden for a minute. Why does God put us into a garden? Why not a palace, a shopping mall, a golf course? Why a garden? What a beautiful metaphor. Think about it a minute. Anybody here do any gardening? If you do gardening, you know that gardening is the most remarkable meeting place of nature and artifice. It's nature growing, but it's we who organize it. Nature and artifice, and everything in a garden supports everything else. There's a fundamental oneness within a garden, a unity, a wholeness, a shlemut in Hebrew, from the word shalom, meaning wholeness. The garden. That's the image of the garden. Well, I want to suggest to you that when we read the first chapters of Genesis, what we have here is a drama in 3 acts. Act 1, God creates a world of wholeness, and as the very last act of creation, God creates one special creature, a human being, who reflects the divine image. We are creators like God. We can bless like God blesses, and we can appreciate, we can cherish the oneness of creation just like God cherishes it. And God puts us into that world of oneness, and then God takes a walk. At the end of the 6th day of creation, it's the most wonderful image. God puts on his sweatshirt, says University of Florida, and he takes a walk through creation. And you have this God who's like felling, like, oh my God, look at that, a pineapple. Oh my God, look at that, a snake, look at that. And like everything in creation gives God joy. And then God encounters the human being that he created. And something happens. It's quite remarkable. What happens? Well, here's what happens. God puts us into that world of oneness and says, enjoy it. It's yours. Take it. Here's where all you have to do is just walk around and enjoy it. But we are creators just like God. And the one thing we want to create more than anything else is ourselves. And we create ourselves. And even if you put a person in paradise, if you take away the freedom to create the conditions of their own existence, the freedom to create their own personality, the freedom to respond to the world, even in paradise, that becomes hell. And human beings, they break out of God's paradise. It wasn't a matter of disobeying God. It was a matter of becoming a creator of our own selves. But the problem is that once we become a creator of our own selves, that becomes our obsession. And we individuate, we become individuals, and we look at everything else as something separate from us, and that becomes a problem. And the story of Genesis is a tragedy, because what happens is we individuate, we push away the oneness that God intended, and we become ourselves. And we fight for ourselves. We fight for our own life, for our own place in the world. And we fight so much that we introduce evil into the world. Because evil is when you forget that you're part of the whole and you go it alone. In the same way that cancer is a cell that doesn't want to be part of the body, evil is when one of us says, I don't care about what you need. I'm doing it for myself. Evil enters the world, and soon the world is this place of evil. And God regrets having created it. End of Act 1. God says, oh my God, look what I did. The whole thing becomes ruined. That's the end of Act 1. It's a sad story, you know? Now, what do you do if you create something and it ends up ruined? Now, I'm a baker. I happen to love baking. Anybody here love baking? Anybody ever here screw up a formula, screw up a recipe? You accidentally put salt instead of sugar. You ever do that one? Or you forgot the yeast, or the yeast you put in didn't rise, and instead of a challah, you end up with a cracker. So you can fix things to an extent, but after a while you say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to bury it at the bottom of the rubbish so that nobody knows I even made it. And I'm going to run to the bakery and buy a cake. And that's what God says. At the end of the first act of creation, God says, I'm going to destroy it all, and it'll be as if it never was. And just before he's about to destroy it all, his eye catches one human being who has moral potential. And that human being is Russell Crowe. No, that human being is Noah. And God says, oh, look, he has possibility. And God decides, I'm going to destroy it all, but I'm going to save this guy and his kids and some animals, and I'll start over again. Act 2, I couldn't create a human being to share my world. I couldn't create a human being to bring blessing into my world and to maintain the oneness of my world. Maybe I can choose one. And he chooses Noah, and he wipes away everything else. And he says to Noah, you will start creation over again. Act 2. But you know, Noah's also a flawed human being. And when Noah and his kids come out of the ark, they're no different than Adam. They also push away God's desire for a world of oneness. They also push away their solidarity with the rest of nature and the rest of humanity. They also are at odds with each other. And God says, oy vavoy, I couldn't create a human being to share my dream of a world of oneness. I couldn't choose a human being to share my dream of a world of oneness, but I promised not to destroy it all again. Now what am I going to do? Maybe I can teach one. Maybe I can teach one human being, one human family, to carry my dream of oneness into the world. And that's where we enter the picture. God looks around the world and he chooses one guy. Now, there is a long, long tradition of Midrash explaining why God chose Abraham. But I'm going to tell you the real reason. God chose Abraham for the most obvious reason, because his name starts with an A. He was the first in line. It was a random choice. If his name was Zachary, he never would have gotten chosen. God finds this one guy named Abraham, and God says to him, how would you like to be my partner? I have a simple task for you. Help me bless my world. I'm going to put a screen up here so we can all see this. And this is the beginning of Act 3. God says to God's self, I couldn't create a human being to share my dream of oneness, to bring blessing into the world. I couldn't choose one to bring blessing into the world. Maybe I can teach one to bring blessing into the world. So he chooses this guy, and I tell you, I think he chose at random. And the Lord said, this is Genesis 12, if you're keeping score. The Lord said to Abram, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. It's actually three things. Lech lecha me'artzecha mi'moladetcha mi'beit avicha. Go from the place you were born, from your native land, from your father's house. Now, if you think about that, that's opposite of the way it ought to be. You'd first leave your house, then you'd leave your land, then you'd leave your country. But here it's backwards. Why? Because it's not about leaving a place geographically. It's about leaving a culture. I want you to leave behind everything you know about life, because I want you to think about life in completely different ways, to the place that I will show you. And now comes God's promise. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you, or bless themselves by you. Now, here's what's interesting about this. There's a very, very famous mythologist named Joseph Campbell, who had a special on PBS many years ago, so a lot of people got to meet him. And Campbell collects mythologies from all over the world, and he sort of compares them. And you know what he found? Every culture in the world has the same story. Every single one. Every culture in the world has a story where a God says to a human being, I'm choosing you. You go into the world. You and me will conquer the world. You and me will rule the world. And I'll give you blessing, and I'll give you fame, and I'll give you power. Every single world mythology, Mesopotamian mythology from the Middle East, Greco-Roman mythology from Europe, right? Norse mythology from Scandinavia, Navajo mythology, Aboriginal mythology from Australia, Polynesian mythology. Every single mythology in the world has a guy who says, follow me and I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you. And the Bible knows that you know that every other mythology in the world has the same story, because the Bible here is playing. It's playing off of what's familiar. I will make of you a great nation. Well, that's nice. All the gods say that. I will bless you. All the gods say that. I will make your name great. You'll be famous. All the gods say that. But here's where the Bible departs. And here's how the Bible works. The next line is unique. The next line occurs in no other world mythology. It's the only one, because the next line in all the other world mythologies is that you and me together will conquer the world. But that's not what the Torah says. What does the Torah say? Heye bracha. You here are not to conquer the world. You're to be a blessing. Now stop and think about that for a minute. I know what it means to say a blessing. What does it mean to be a blessing? What does it mean to be a blessing? Is there anybody in the world that when you think of that person, you sigh and say, oh, she's my blessing. He was my blessing. At that moment in my life, that person was my blessing. What does it mean to be a blessing? It means to be the right person at the right time with the right word and the right touch and the right gesture, and to give us strength and healing and inspiration to be a blessing. In case you wondered, ladies and gentlemen, this is the job description of the Jewish people. If you ever wondered why you're a Jew, what you're in the world expected to do, this is what we do. We were charged by God to be a blessing. By the way, this is what I say to every bar mitzvah kid. They're all tired of hearing it already because I've done it now for 30 years. I say to the kid, listen, you get into Stanford, I'm going to be really proud of you. You get an Academy Award, I'll come to the party, I promise you, especially if you mention me in the speech. You know, you get your name in the newspaper for good stuff, of course, I'll be delighted. But that's not how we judge your success as a human being here. When you stand on this bima and chant from the Torah, there's only one standard that makes you a successful life, and that is, are you a blessing? Is there someone in the world when they hear your name will say, oh, she's my blessing. He's a blessing to me. Can I be a blessing? And now, because the Torah always says things twice if it's important, look what it says next. I'll bless those who bless you. That's important. I'll curse those who curse you. That's even better, by the way. I have that on a bumper sticker on my car, right? And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you, shall bless themselves by you. It's interesting what God doesn't say. God doesn't say what you think he's going to say. God doesn't say, be a blessing to me. God doesn't say, obey me, follow my ways, do what I tell you to do. No, no, no. Your job isn't to make God happy. Your job to make God happy is to go into the world and bring blessings to the world. You are to bring blessings to the world. The object of your blessing is not even your own people. Your object is to be a blessing to the world around you. Now, you have to ask a question on the quiz. This is the question. Is this a statement of Jewish particularity, a Jewish sense of our Jewish mission? Or is this a sense of Jewish universalism, our sense of what we owe the world outside? And the answer is yes. This is a sense of our specialness as a Jewish people. And this is the same sense, a sense of our specialness as a Jewish people is what we owe the world outside of us. You can't separate the two. It's always been united because we are to be a blessing, but a blessing to the world. And that's the job description of the Jewish people. So what do we have here? God says, I need you. I created a world and I want to bless that world, but I can't do it alone. I need a partner. I tried to create a partner, it didn't work. I tried to choose a partner, it didn't work. So maybe I can teach you. Maybe I can teach you to live a life which will be a blessing to the world outside. And that's why we exist as a people. Now, the Torah is going to have some fun with this idea because this is an amazing idea. God needs us. We're in need of God. God needs a partner. And what kind of partner? What does it mean to be God's partner in the world? I want to stop for just a second and I want to tell you, I want to explain what this means. I call this chutzpah. Now, you all know the word chutzpah, right? The word chutzpah means, in Yiddish, it means temerity or nerve, or cheekiness, insolence, right? I mean, the clinical definition of chutzpah in Leo Rostin's Joys of Yiddish is the kid who kills his parents and throws himself on the mercy of the court as an orphan. But that was funny until somebody actually did it. That's not funny anymore. The story of chutzpah. What's the story of chutzpah? Bubby takes her little Einikel, her little grandson, down to the shore, down to the beach to go swimming in the ocean. And the kid's digging sandcastles in the beach. Comes along a giant wave, a tsunami, and whips the kid out to sea. Bubby turns her eyes toward heaven and says, for this I suffered, for this I suffered and suffered, for this I prayed, this is what you do to me, how can you do this, you can't do this to me. Comes along another big giant wave and deposits the kid right in her arms. Not a hair on his head has been touched. And she turns her eyes toward heaven and says, He had a hat. That's called chutzpah. But you see, chutzpah isn't just that, because the word chutzpah is not Yiddish. It's actually much, much older than Yiddish. The word chutzpah already occurs in the Talmud, right? Which is 1,500 years before Yiddish was invented, right? The word chutzpah, or 1,000 years before Yiddish was invented, sorry. The word chutzpah in the Talmud means insolence, but it has a second meaning, which is even better. It means irrepressible life, irrepressible strength, irrepressible power. There's a beautiful statement in the Yerushalmi, in the Talmud of Jerusalem, that says the land of Israel is possessed of this quality of chutzpah because no matter how many times the land is conquered, every spring it sprouts with beautiful flowers. There's life in it. And I want to suggest that the real message of Judaism, the message of Torah, the message of our faith is chutzpah. Not in the sense, God forbid, of insolence, but in the sense that we have this idea that we are empowered, that we are responsible, that we are God's partners in bringing blessing to the world. That is a sense of deep, deep responsibility. And at the same time, it is a source of our dignity. It is a source of meaning. It gives life structure. It tells us what we're to do with the days we enjoy here in the world. That's chutzpah. Let's take a look at more chutzpah. You ready? Because once you establish this idea that Genesis establishes that we are God's partners, well, what does that mean? Well, the Torah is now going to run an experiment and see what that might mean. And that's going to be found in the 18th chapter of the book of Genesis. I put it up on the screen for you.
Rabbi, can I jump in for 1 second just to let everyone know, if you'd like to download these text sheets, they're in the chat box and you can just click and download from there.
Yeah, or you can get the Chumash off the shelf and read it from there. It's just taken from the Chumash, that's all.
And a book report.
And the book report, right. The book report's due at the end of the day. So you remember Abraham and his wife have a problem. God has promised that they will have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the beach, but they don't have any children. They don't have any kids. And Abraham keeps saying to God, every time God says, you will be the father of many nations, Abraham says, I just want one kid. You will have descendants more than you can count. One kid. I just want one kid who'll play baseball with me. They get so desperate that Sarah, his wife, gives her husband the maid, Hagar. Ladies and gentlemen, don't try that at home. It didn't work for Abraham. It won't work for you. And then finally, what happens is Abraham is met by 3 angels. 3 angels come to his doorplace and they sit down and eat dinner. And one of the angels says, Mazel Tov, you're about to be parents. You're going to have a kid. Now, of course, Sarah is 90 years old, and she starts laughing hysterically. She says, I'm 90. You look at me and look at my old man, right? He's 100, and Viagra won't be invented for another 3,200 years. So I don't know what you're talking about. And God says, you don't think I can do miracles? Watch this. And she's pregnant. Don't ask me how. That leaves 2 angels. Now, these 2 angels have a message, and here's the message. This is Genesis 18. The men set out from there and looked down towards Sodom. So Abraham lives in Hebron, in Kiryat Arba, right at the edge of the Rift Valley, that great valley where the Dead Sea is. And Sodom was a great city in the Rift Valley. Abraham walking with them to see them off. Verse 17. Now the Lord had said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Now stop for a minute. Who's God talking to? He's talking to himself. This is divine rumination. This is God talking to himself. Should I tell Abraham what I'm going to do? And what's the answer to that question? The ostensible answer to that question is, of course, you should hide from Abraham what you're going to do. What do you got to tell him what you're going to do? You don't owe him an explanation. Who is he? He's a man. You're God. You don't have to explain yourself. What's the fun of being God if you got to tell people where you go? Now, me, I'm married. And because I'm married, I have to explain to my wife what I'm doing. I'll be out. I'll be back at 4 o'clock. Because I work for a community, I have to make an accounting of my time to the community, tell them what I do. But God doesn't have a wife, and God doesn't have a board of directors. God doesn't have to explain himself to anybody. Except now, something radical has changed. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him, I've singled him out that he may instruct his posterity by keeping the way of the Lord, by doing what is just and right. He's my partner. He is the ambassador of divine justice and divine righteousness in the world. And if he is going to represent me in the world, if he's going to represent my goodness, my righteousness in the world, if he's going to bring blessing into the world, he's got to understand how I operate. God finds himself in a very unique position. God now has to explain himself to people, which is remarkable. And the Lord said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, their sin is so grave, I'll go down and take a look. He's modeling an investigative behavior. Before you indict, you've got to gather evidence. So they go down to Sodom, and Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Now, verse 23, here's where the story becomes amazing. Now, Abraham came forward. Vayigash Avraham. He steps up to the plate. He steps into the encounter. He steps into the conversation. And here's the speech. Here's the speech. Great speech. And he says to God, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there be 50 innocent in the city? Will you wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the 50 innocent in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? What a story. What a question. What a remarkable speech. He stands in front of God and he says, you can't do this. You can't do this. I mean, just think about what he's saying, right? Well, there could be 50 innocent. You can't destroy the city and destroy them together. And it's this line. Look at verse 25. I want to read this very carefully with you. Now, it begins with the phrase, far be it from you. Its Hebrew is chalila lecha. Chalila lecha does not mean far be it from you. That's because the translator, H.L. Ginsberg, learned English at the University of London, and he was a very cultured gentleman. I took a class from him. Chalila lecha doesn't mean that. I'll tell you what it means. Anybody here have Yiddish-speaking friends, Yiddish-speaking parents? When my parents would go on vacation, they would leave us with my grandmother. My grandmother was this little teeny lady, 4'4", little Lithuanian lady. And what would happen as soon as my parents left the house, my brothers and I would beat the life out of each other. And Bubby, my grandmother, would walk in. She would walk into the room and she'd see me beating up my brother. And she didn't raise a hand and she didn't raise her voice. What she did was give me the look. It's a look perfected by 200 generations of angry bubbies. And she would whisper 3 words in Yiddish. I don't know if you know Yiddish, but she'd whisper 3 words. She'd say, Shanda, and a cherpa, which means shame on you. I'm so disappointed in you. I'm so disappointed. You are so not the person I know you can be. Shanda and a cherpa. And then she dropped the bomb. The 3rd word was feh. And I drop to my knees and say, Bubby, hit me with a stick, but don't give me feh. Because the one person in the world I never wanted to disappoint was my grandmother, because she loved me so much. But when my Bubby said to me, Shanda Necherpa, I'm so disappointed in you. It just, that's what Abraham says to God. I'm so disappointed in you. You would do such a thing? You would kill the innocent along with the guilty? So that innocent and guilty are the same. The Hebrew is much more graphic, because v'haya katzadi karasha. So that innocent and guilty are the same. So you want a world where there's no moral differentiation. There's no moral difference between good and evil, between justice and injustice, between the guilty and the innocent, between the righteous and the wicked. Is that the world you wanted? Is that the world you wanted? Is that the world you wanted me to help you build? A world where there's no morals, no moral differentiation between right and wrong? Is that the world you wanted? Chalila lecha, shame on you. Feh, he says. The judge of all the earth isn't going to do justice. Is that the world you wanted? And the next line is so amazing. The next line, the reason I'm Jewish is the next line. Because what should God do at this point? God should say, forget it. I'm not talking to you anymore. Why would God take such a rebuke from a human being. Why would God accept such chutzpah? But look what God does. Look at the next line of the Torah. The Lord said, okay, fine, you win. You win. I'll give up. If you find 50, I'll give you the city. I'll give you the city if you find 50. Now, Abraham has sold enough camels in the shuk of Beersheba that he knows once he's got a live one in a shop, he knows how to play the game. And now what happens is the most absurd story in the Torah. If it wasn't written, you wouldn't believe it would be here. Abraham says, listen, God, I'm going to talk again. I'm just dust and ashes. Who am I? But what if the 50 last 5? Would you give me to me for 45? Would you give me 45? God says, okay, I'll give you 45. 45. You give me 45. Would you give it for 40? Okay, I'll give you the world for 40. 40. Can I have 30? 30. I'll give you for 30. 20. Do I hear 20? Is there a 20 in the room? Do I see a 20? Do I see a 20? I see a 20 over there. 20. Do I see a 10? Is there a 10? One last bid. Is there a 10? Yes, there's a 10. Going once. Going twice, sold to the God of the universe. What crazy world is this? A human being bargaining with God the way that you would in an auction? And yet that's the point of the story. The point of the story is that God accepts Abraham's rebuke. God welcomes Abraham's argument because God is more interested in a human being. God is more committed. God is happier having a human being in the world who will stand for justice than he is having a human being who is obedient and obsequious and bows down. God don't want people bowing down. God wants people standing up and demanding justice. God is willing to sacrifice God's prerogatives of authority in favor of a human being who will champion justice. That's the remarkable story. That's the chutzpah of the Torah. That's what it means to be a Jew. That's what the whole Torah is about. That's the answer to the question. Now, I want to take a moment and do a little digression with you. Because see, in the Bible, every story has a counter story. And there's a counter story to this one, which only highlights how important this is. And I want to show you that story, okay? There is a book at the end of the Bible. We Jews almost never read it. There's no holiday when it's assigned to it, and it's tucked in there, and it's not an easy book to read. It's called the Book of Job. Anybody ever hear the Book of Job? It's tucked there after Psalms and Proverbs before we get to the Megillah, and it's a really sad story. Once upon a time in the merry old land of Uz, there was a man named Job who was very holy. He was righteous and good, just like Noah. He revered God and kept away from evil, just like Abraham. He had 7 sons and daughters and all the money in the world. And then the story takes us into heaven. And there is an angel in heaven who plays prosecutor. He's called the Satan, the Satan, but he's not like the evil Satan. He's just like God's alter ego. And God starts bragging on Job and says, have you seen Job? Job is such a righteous guy. Job is amazing. And the Satan, the Satan, the adversary, says to God, well, of course, look, you made him rich. You gave him everything a man could want. Take away that stuff and he won't be so righteous. And God says, okay, you can do that, but don't kill him. And so it goes that he loses everything. He loses his children. He loses his wealth. And then he finally loses his health. He becomes terribly ill with a horrible disease. And his wife, who's part of the curse, by the way, she says, curse God and die. And he won't. He said, no. You've heard of the patience of Job. It lasts 2 chapters. And then for the next 35 chapters, Job turns his eyes toward heaven and he starts to scream. He says to God, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? I'm a righteous man. If I did something wrong and this is my punishment, tell me what it is and I'll repent. What good does it do to punish me for something I don't even know what it is I'm being punished for? What good is that? Tell me what I did and I will repent. And he screams this again and again. Now, he has these neighbors who come, and ostensibly they're supposed to come and comfort him, but they don't. What they do is they make it worse. I mean, one of the neighbors comes and says, well, you deserve this. You certainly deserve this, right? Right? It's and Job just gives up. He gets so angry. He argues. And the lines are so interesting, right? He says to his neighbors right over here in chapter 8, he says, he says, if, let me go back here. In chapter 9, I'm sorry. Job says, I know this is true. Man cannot win a suit against God. If I brought God to court, I couldn't win, right? If he insisted on a trial with him, he would not answer one charge in 1,000. Wise of heart and mighty in power, who challenged God and came out whole? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Who can say, what are you doing? God does not restrain his anger. How can I answer him or choose my argument? Though I were in the right, I could not speak, but I would plead for mercy with the judge. If I summoned God, he wouldn't respond. I don't believe he would lend me his ear. Right here at the top. If a trial of strength, he's the strong one. But if we're in court, who's going to summon him? Though I were innocent, my mouth would condemn me. Though I were blameless, he would prove me crooked. I am blameless. I'm distraught. I'm sick of life. It's all one. He destroys the blameless and the guilty. That sound familiar to anybody? This is the opposite of the Abraham story. This is the man who said, I can't challenge God. I don't have a right to challenge God. And now here's how the story ends. I know you want to know how it ends. God shows up. God shows up. The Lord replied to Job out of the tempest. Now, what is a tempest? Tempest is a hurricane. You live in Florida, you know from hurricanes. Now, when God talks to Elijah, it's in a still small voice. When God talks to Joseph, it's in his dreams. When God talks to Job, he comes in a hurricane. Does that tell you something? And God asks Job this question: who do you think you are? Who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man. I'll ask, you tell me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? God asks him, takes 3 chapters. He says, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? You're just a puny man. You can't question me. I'm God. Who do you think you are? And then he ends in chapter 40. The Lord replied to Job, shall one who should be disciplined complain against Shaddai? That's God. He who arraigns God must respond. God says to Job, shut up. Sheket. You don't have a right to ask me. You don't have a place. You don't have the wisdom. You don't have anything. You have no place, no position to ask me why I do what I do. And then here's the really sad ending of the story. This is how Job responds to that. Job says, I know you can do everything. He's talking to God. That nothing you propose is impossible. Who is this who obscures counsel without knowledge? I spoke without understanding of things beyond me, which I didn't know. Here's the ending. Here now I will speak. I will ask, you tell me. I had heard you with my ears, now I see you with my eyes. Therefore I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes. Job says, okay, I will be quiet. I will suck it up. I will accept what happens to me. I will not question you. I will not argue with you. Whatever you do is whatever you do. I will accept it. Now, what we have here in Job is an opposite of Abraham. Abraham stands up and says, you can't do this. It's not justice. Job says the same thing. You can't do it's not justice. But then finally, Job gives up at the end. Job says, I give up. I give up. And what's interesting is how many times the language of the 2 stories parallel. Look at this last line. I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes. Everybody see that? There's only 2 places in the whole Hebrew Bible where a person says, I am dust and ashes. This chapter here in Job and Genesis 18, which we just read. Here in Job, it's his surrender. I will give up. I resign. I can't ask you questions. In Genesis, it's the opposite. If you go up here, Genesis, it's when Abraham starts arguing with God. It's ironic. It's meant to be ironic. I am but dust and ashes. What can I do? But I have to ask you this question. Are you going to kill these innocent people? Now, here's the point of that story. The book of Job and the book of Abraham are like opposites. They create for us 2 different religious universes. The universe of Job is a universe in which human beings can't question. They just have to accept what happens to them. The world of Abraham is a world in which we challenge, we push back, we demand justice. Interesting thing about Job, though, I got to tell you something. I've never met a Jewish kid named Job. Yeah, I got Jewish kid named Mordechai, Jewish kids named Moshe, Jewish kids named Abraham. I've never met a Jewish, anybody know a Jewish kid named Job? Not one. Turns out the Hebrew word Job, Eov in Hebrew, is not a Hebrew name, because the story wasn't originally a Jewish story. It was taken from outside. It was taken from a much older source than even the Bible. The name Job is actually an Akkadian name. Akkadian is the oldest written language in the world. And in ancient Akkadian, the name Job means everyman. John Doe, occupant. I get a lot of his mail here, right? Every person. And every person meets God in nature. When Job asks God, who are you? God shows him nature, and nature doesn't care if you're good or evil, right? Nature doesn't have any conscience. If there's a flood, if there's a hurricane, hurricanes destroy the homes of good people as well as the homes of bad people. Earthquakes destroy the homes of good people as well as bad people. Cancer strikes good people as well as bad people. Nature doesn't have moral differentiation. That's what Job discovers, and all you can do in the face of nature is just accept it. Scream all you want. The wind is going to blow. The sun is going to shine. The rain is going to fall. It's not going to change anything. Abraham, however, is covenanted. He has a different relationship with the world. He has a mandate. He has a responsibility to bring justice into the world. And because he has a responsibility as a covenanted person to bring justice in the world, because he has a different sense of what the world is and what his role in it is, he refuses to resign. He refuses to surrender. He demands justice. Now, there's a bottom line to this. I got to warn you before you finish. If you want tranquility in your life, if you want serenity in your life, choose the world of Job. Learn how to accept. But tranquility and serenity are not Jewish values. Right? I have a friend who's very religious Christian, and he says, I love coming to your synagogue. I said, why? He says, because it's so damn noisy. He says, you come to church, it's so quiet. Church is tranquil. Church is serene. Church is orderly. You come to shul, he said, everybody talks to you. Everybody comes up and talks to you in the middle of the prayers. Everybody wants to know how you are. Everybody wants to know who you are. Everybody wants to know everything. He says, I love it here. He says, you should come to my church. It's so quiet. Tranquility is not a Jewish value. If you want tranquility, you stand as Job and say, I accept what's around me. I resign. But to be Jewish is to accept the challenge of demanding justice in a very difficult world. It's a hard life. It's not easy. And it only has one huge payoff. And the one huge payoff is that you gain dignity from that sense of empowerment and responsibility. You gain dignity from being a blessing in the world. That's what the Torah promises us, a sense of meaning and purpose and the dignity that comes with that. I got to tell you honestly that I've come to the conclusion that the opposite of Judaism is not atheism. The opposite of Judaism is, God forbid, not Christianity or Islam. The opposite of Judaism is surrender. It's Job. It's giving up. It's the person who says what is what must be, and there's no way to change it. It's to retreat into my own private space and say, I don't want to deal with the world. It's too hard. I'm just going to accept what is. It's to give up and say, I can't change a thing. That's the opposite of Judaism. Because Judaism teaches us, like Abraham, to say, this is not the world that I want. This is not the world that I demand. This is not the world that I accept. I'm going to push for justice in this world, right? And for that reason, I have to tell you what you get for that, right? Being Jewish will not make you thin. Trust me on this one. Being Jewish will not make you rich. I'm sorry. Being Jewish will not make you popular. Being Jewish will not give you any of those rewards of the world. It's not designed to do that. It's only designed to do one thing. It's designed to give you a life that matters, a life of chutzpah, a life of empowerment, responsibility, meaning, purpose, and dignity. And that it does very, very well. So, would I recommend this book to my friends? Yep, I would, with all my heart. Thank you for listening today. I would be happy to hang out with you and the rabbis and answer all of your questions. And I hope that you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Rabbi Feinstein. So yes, I imagine we're going to have a lot of questions and comments because a lot of what you said was very stimulating. So we invite you, if you have a question, to please put in the chat, or raise your hand vigorously, or use the hand raising feature on the app. And Sabrina Silverberg, you're going to go first. But other people, keep your hands up currently, because we have so many screens. It's going to take a minute. If you,
I see Dan Amanoff will have the second question.
Beautiful. Dan, please unmute, and Maura Sabrina.
Maura Sabrina, our Director of Education, with the first question.
So I wanted to say thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, for this very inspirational hour. And also, I wanted to say, as an Israeli Hebrew school director, kol hakavod to your Israeli teacher for sending you to the library and not to the youth lounge.
Yeah. She's responsible for my love of Jewish books.
That's awesome.
Aval Yivritseli kol kach tov, zashmati. My Hebrew's pretty bad. That's because I spent all my time reading in the library. Ken Gerrit, Mayesh.
I have a couple of questions. So I wanted to refer to the beginning of your lecture.
Yeah.
And you spoke about, as humans, we need to create, we need to embrace our unique purpose in creation.
Yeah.
So how does a person maintain their creativity and individuality and still be part of that oneness? That's my first question.
Yeah, then, I think all of us have to find our place in the world. I mean, the idea is that all of us, I say to kids when they ask me these questions, I think that there is a place for each one of us. And you wander the world looking for that place. And when you find that place that fits your abilities and your passions, you devote yourself to that, body and soul. And that's what life is. Your life is finding that your role in the world. So you are a mora, you're a teacher, mechanechet, you know, your role is to train our children, to give them the gift of Torah, right? I'm a storyteller and a rabbi. My father's a baker, right? My father's a wonderful baker. My father made every bar mitzvah cake, every wedding cake, every celebration for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people in the community. And he took a lot of pride in being, you know, the baker of the community. We find the place where we belong and we devote ourselves to that, body and soul. And that's how we create as part of God's plan.
It sounds very much like Martin Buber. Find your uniqueness, find your purpose, develop it not for yourself, but for the purpose of making the world better.
Yeah, I mean, so this is where it differs from Joseph Campbell. Campbell says, go find your bliss. I agree, go find your bliss, but your bliss will not be found in simply enjoying the gifts of the world. Your bliss will be found in accepting a deep responsibility and devoting yourself to it. You got to give of yourself. I mean, this is the truth of the Torah. You've got to give of yourself, serve something bigger than yourself. And out of that comes a great deal of frustration, but also the only satisfactions that really matter in the world. So that's exactly right.
We're going to go to Dan. If there's time, Maura Sabrina, we'll get to your next question, but we have over 100 people here. So we're going to go to Dan Amanoff next.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Yesha Koach. Thank you for a very inspiring sermon and teaching. I'm inspired by the artwork behind you, and I think it fits perfectly. I wonder if you think of it as a double helix, because when you say
it is a double helix.
Yes, so the irrepressible life, DNA, is a partnership, a creator God and creator man, and you need both. You need both. And I wonder, you have Hebrew written throughout that, and it really becomes the tree of life behind you. I wonder if you could comment on that piece of art.
Are you the Dan Amanoff who's a friend of my brother's?
No, he's another Dan Amanoff.
Oh, there's another Dan Amanoff.
In LA, yeah. He's completely unrelated.
Oh, I was going to ask. All right, it was nice to meet you. You're the Dan. You're the second. You're the second best Dan Amanoff I've ever met. That's my. this what's behind me, it's not really here, it's a screen, but this is the thank you for noticing. That was so perceptive and so beautiful what you said. You're exactly right. This is a stained glass window in my synagogue, and the art, I can give you a tour of it here. The artist took exactly that. The artist took the double helix of the DNA, and he wrote the names of all the Torah portions on the DNA, because the Torah is Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. And here is the tree of life with the names of the Torah portions, and the fruit of the tree of life, according to the Kabbalah, are pomegranates, are rimonim, and in the rimonim are the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. All the words of Torah are concentrated in the sweetness of the rimonim, of the pomegranates, and of the figs, see the fig here, and of the grapes. These are all of the biblical fruits. And what you can't see here is that down below, I didn't put this on the screen, the root of this, the lower level where it's rooted, is this soil filled with letters. So the tree of life grows out of the world of letters and words, gives us the tree of Torah and the fruit of tradition, the fruit of tradition's wisdom. And thank you for noticing that. That was so beautiful of you. So if you ever come to LA, ladies and gentlemen, I'm in Encino, and these windows are truly magnificent. And there's a beautiful set of them, and I'd love to give you a tour of them if you ever come. So Dan, you get the first tour. Next time you can get on a plane and come out here, you get the very first tour, and I'll take you to lunch, okay?
They are gorgeous windows, and we love that chapel. I also like the stained glass in our sanctuary, for those of you that are yearning to get back and see an actual background. Do we have any other questions, friends? Please wave your hand. We'll look for you. I also see some in the chat. There's one that Lawrence Barnett, one of our co-chairs. Why didn't Job, also Ecclesiastes, tie this link to Abraham's difference plainly, or was he just waiting for you?
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. That's a great question as well. Really wonderful question. I'm going to say that the answer is right there. The language of Job parallels the language of Genesis 18 all over the place. And the writers of Torah were very sensitive to language. They had a deep sensitivity, and they knew that you would connect them. I'm not the only one to connect them. It's the connections are pretty obvious when you read them. It's just that we don't live in that kind of a culture where words have that kind of power. We live in a culture which is much more visual, and we have, look, they lived in a world before television, before internet, before telephones. Think of all the things stuffed in our heads, right? How many phone numbers you can remember and how many internet addresses you can remember. They didn't have any of that. They had Torah, they had Bibles. So they were much, much, much more attuned to the parallels of language. And to see Job and Abraham as opposites in their world was obvious. It's not obvious to us because we don't read with the kind of care that they read with. Okay, and that's really the they didn't have to remember 10 internet addresses, and they didn't have to remember, I don't know how many passwords I have for how many different accounts. They have to remember any of this stuff, so they would remember Torah instead, right?
Rabbi, I have a question, if I might.
Yes, Rabbi Michael.
One of the things that I was really struck by is the title of this session, right? The history of chutzpah. And I'm wondering if there's a moment or a particular, a text or something that you lean towards other than Chalila Lecha, which sort of shows maybe the other direction, where it sort of goes back to like, you've got some chutzpah, right? You're a chutzpahdik moment, where you're crossing a line where chutzpah, goes the other direction, sort of from what you're using as the charge, where it became like, oh, you shouldn't do that at all.
Well, I frankly, that moment with Abraham, I made fun of it, but I actually think that there's a moment of suspense there. A man stands up to God and says, how dare you? How dare you? And you almost expect God to smash him. I mean, why would God put up with anything like this? I mean, I almost think, Rabbi Michael, if you've ever had, you ever have a 12-year-old kid, you ever taught 7th grade Hebrew school, and a 7th grade Hebrew school kid gives you a hard time, and you say like, kid, I'm going to revoke your bris. How dare, I'm the rabbi. Like, who the hell are you to talk to me like that? Abraham stands up in front of God and says, I know you're the master of heaven and earth. I know you're my creator. I know you're the master of life and death, but you can't do that. And you almost expect God to say, like, no, Smush, get me somebody quieter. Go find me a nice, quiet person who doesn't argue. I mean, the chutzpah, it carries that message, but that's the point. And the reason why I called it the history, we could go farther. I mean, if you want to spend another 2 hours, we could talk about how the same theme of chutzpah plays out elsewhere in the Bible, how the same theme of chutzpah plays out in the Talmud, how the same theme of chutzpah plays out in medieval literature. This is one of the leitmotifs, I think one of the most significant, that's why I argued it, leitmotif in all of Jewish life. It elevates the human being. It elevates us. It gives us a profound sacred responsibility and a profound sense of empowerment. Now, they have to go together, by the way, because if you take one without the other, you end up with a caricature. If you take empowerment without responsibility, you get arrogance. And if you take responsibility without empowerment, you get despair. But if you have a sense of being empowered, I have the capacity, and a sense of responsibility, I know that someone's counting on me to get this done, that's what yields a sense of meaning and purpose and dignity. And that really is what you find throughout the Jewish tradition. You find this throughout the Jewish tradition. That's why we're such a noisy people. We're out there screaming all the time. I demand justice. I demand something better. I'm not going to accept the world as it is. I'm not going to accept injustice, unrighteousness, wickedness, evil, brokenness, corruption. No, that's not my job. My job is not to turn the other way. Right? I mean, think of that story. We can get into Exodus, which is where we're reading this morning, Shabbos, right? Moses sees a guy getting beaten to death. He could have turned the other way. He doesn't do it. That's the point. We don't turn the other way. We turn toward the injustice and we try to stop it. We try to fix it. We try to do tikkun. And what happens is you end up with a heroic tradition of great ones who tried to stop injustice. That's the tradition. That's the tradition. That's what's called upon us to do.
I've got one more question in the chat. If anybody doesn't have one, otherwise. So Denise asks, do you think the difference in attitude between Abraham and Job is that one is respectful and one is complaining? And what's the significance of that in our world?
Well, the difference is, I think that what the Bible is presenting us is a religious universe and inviting us to inhabit that religious universe and ask ourselves, could I live in this universe? Could I live in Job's universe? And I got to tell you something, by the way, let's be honest about this. There are times when we do need to live in Job's universe. And there are times when we live in Abraham's universe. I mean, there's a time, Ecclesiastes was right. There is a time when acceptance is a value, okay? I don't want to get very sad about this, but your rabbis certainly know this, and I think all of you know this. There are times, for example, when the doctors say, we can't do anything else. And fighting back is not the right moment, the right move at that point. We can feel the injustice of it. We can feel the pain of it. But learning to say, okay, well, if that's what it is, let's make the best of what we have. Let's make the best. There are times when we have to have acceptance. But there are times when we have to see what we see outside, when we see injustice and we see unrighteousness, we have to step up and say, I'm not going to accept that. I'm simply not going to accept that. And maybe I'm not even the extent of saying, maybe I don't have the capacity at this moment to fix it, but I'm not going to make my peace with it. I'm not going to make my peace with it because it's not right. Someday I will find a way to address this. Someday I will find a way to address this. And I think that's really the Jewish answer. And it yields a great deal of, and we do this, by the way, as a community, which is why Jewish community is always filled with argument and dialogue. Giving sermons and lectures like this is really not Jewish either, because you're supposed to be able to yell at me and say, no, you're wrong, right? And I'm used to that because I live in a Jewish family, you know. I mean, but you know, we have to argue. We have to use each other's ingenuity and each other's vision and share our visions and discuss when do we fight back and when do we fight back and when do we accept and when do we and how do we fight back and how do we push against injustice and when are our efforts to push against injustice counterproductive? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that we have to ask. So anyway, this is I'm trying to capture, as I said at the beginning of the talk, an answer to the great question that my own children ask me, which is, why should I be Jewish? What is the message of Jewish life? And to me, this is the message.
I see that Ruth Skoll has her hand raised. Ruth, you have the floor. Ruth, you'll need to unmute, though.
Arnie Kaplan had just unmuted himself. Arn, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, if I may.
Please go ahead.
I just absolutely thoroughly was enthralled with your sermon. It was just wonderful.
Arn, can you speak up a bit or get closer to your microphone?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Better, get even closer.
Okay.
I can hear you. Thank you, sir.
In one of the questions I always have in my mind that I can't understand from any theological perspective is the Holocaust. And how would, as you think of the Holocaust, how would you judge God's role and God's interface with man in terms of the Holocaust?
Well, that's a simple question. Arnie, thank you for the question. That's a very profound and powerful question. If you start with the premise, you start with the idea that God is in charge of everything, then you have to be very angry at God for something as horrifying as the Holocaust. Because in many ways, it is the ultimate evil. 1 million Jewish children destroyed, 6 million Jewish souls, 11 million people murdered systematically by the Nazis. If you say God is in charge of all of history, then you have to say, new God, why would you allow something like this to happen? But if you say that God has put us in the world, and we are the hands of God to make the world whole, and we are the voice of God to cry out the injustices, and it is our responsibility to bring blessing into the world, the way Genesis says, then you say, we failed, not God. God showed us the right way. God taught us and told us that we were in charge of bringing blessings into the world. And we allowed a monster like Hitler to rise. We allowed the horrors of the Holocaust to continue. We didn't do what we were supposed to do to protect each other. We turned our backs upon victims. And then it becomes not a failure of God, but a failure of human beings. And it was a failure of human beings. And you can either say, well, that's just the way people are, and then you give up again. Or you can say, no, I still believe that humanity can learn from this experience. And humanity can use their powers to bring wholeness to the world, even so. And redouble your efforts, even so. And that's how I choose to think about it. Now, I happened to work for 30 years for a rabbi who had a unique perspective on this. Rabbi Harold Schulweis, who taught this idea that we are the ones who bring blessing in the world. But that raises a terribly tough question. So if we're supposed to bring blessing in the world, were there people who did that even during the Holocaust? And he discovered that there were thousands upon thousands of Christians who saved Jewish people during the Holocaust. Now, compared to the Nazis, that wasn't a big number. And compared to the numbers who were murdered, it wasn't a big number, the ones saved. But the fact that there were some, that there was an Oskar Schindler and a Raoul Wallenberg and a Jupp Westerwald and a Sempo Sugihara, that there were members of the church, but there were and policemen and governors and royalty. I mean, in every country in Europe, there were a chosen few, a small number of people who said, I will not stand by and watch this evil happen. And we celebrate those people. We celebrate those people. And they represent to us that even in the worst of circumstances, it is always possible to stand up for justice. It has terrible risks, no question about it, terrible risks. But even in the worst of circumstances, it's possible to make justice happen, to bring justice, to bring goodness into an evil and dark and terrifying world. And because of that testimony, that becomes our inspiration to go and do that in our own circumstances. So my answer to you is, how do I believe in a God after the Holocaust? I still believe that God empowers us to bring goodness to the world. We failed terribly. But we did gain, but we do have this example of those who fought for the right, for what was right. And we have to continue in their name to do that now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Arn, and thanks for helping to make our Scholar in Residence happen every year.
Thank you so very much. Yes.
Generosity is so appreciated. Do we have any other questions?
Ruth Skoll, we can't see you and can't get you to unmute. Last chance, Ruth. All right.
We have time for one more question, friends, if anybody has one or comment. I mean, you can just feel free to.
Philip Meltzer, if you
great.
could. Philip Meltzer, was that a hand up? You just need to unmute. Mona Salomon, your hand is up.
I just want to thank Rabbi for coming and the speech and all your learning you gave us yesterday and today. Thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thanks so very much. It's a joy to be with you.
All right, well, friends, in a moment, we're going to have a little bit of an after party gathering, and we want to give more Sabrina a chance to the part B of her question, and others who might have been intimidated by the large group and didn't want to speak or to share your words of thanks. Thank you for coming out today. This has been wonderful to spend Shabbat together. Thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, for waking up so early to be with us. With all the jet lag and the time change and everything, you look fantastic. But we're really happy to have shared today with you in this whole Shabbat. Friends, if you have to go, we're going to excuse everybody now and hope to see you in person at 5 today outside with Mass on for Havdalah or the 8:30 broadcast. However, if you want to stick around for another few minutes, we will still be here a little bit more informally. But for those who need to go, we invite you to go ahead and go, and you can unmute for a second and say goodbye. But Rabbi Shefrin has one more word to say.
I do. I wanted to just, friends, if Rabbi Feinstein has one more moment. I know it's Shabbat, and so I don't want to ask you to handle money, but you had said so nicely that there were things that were sent to you by our committee, by the Barnetts and the Kaplans and all the members of our Scholar in Residence committee. And I don't know if you noticed, but in that envelope or package was not only nice words for you, but there was also an envelope that was in there. And in one of those envelopes is a special donation from our temple to what we know is one of your favorite charities in honor of your coming and teaching us this weekend. So I just wanted to acknowledge that our temple is happy to support the work of Beit Teshuvah in Los Angeles. Friends, you may remember Beit Teshuvah when we brought Freedom Song here a few years ago around Passover. I mentioned Rabbi Borovitz in my Yom Kippur sermon this year. That is the institution, and Rabbi Feinstein has a special place in his heart for that organization. So we are happy to have sent you something to give to them in your honor for teaching us this weekend. We're so thrilled to spend Shabbat with you and all of the good work that you do in your community and in the world. It's truly our honor.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you to the community. First, thank you for your kind generosity and your wonderful hospitality. And thank you for the contribution. Beit Teshuvah is very close to me. It's a place where almost everybody in my family worked, frankly. My wife was one of the chaplains. My daughter was one of the therapists. And my son was actually a member of the community. He had issues, and they gave him a great deal of strength and wisdom. And it saved so many lives of people that I love. And it's a great place. So thank you for your kindness there. And thank you for the opportunity to share this time together. And I wish all of you a really wonderful Shabbos. And I hope that perhaps we'll find each other once again. take good care. If anyone comes to LA, I'll show you the window. So Dan, come and visit. It would be great to show you the window in person. Thank you all very, very much. And rabbis,
your hands to say thank you.
Thank you. Take
Shabbat
care.
shalom.
Bye-bye, Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. And of course, Dan rocked it.